It started in Ireland in the mid-18th century, and the cotton industry in Bangor itself started in the early 19th century. It was started by the firm of Hannay and McWilliam, and they built two mills. The old mill was in Lower High Street on the north side, then known as Ballymagee Street. The other mill was in the area which is now on the seaside of Bridge Street, and it was known as the New Mill. It was close to what is now the fountain. They produced cotton thread using steam power, and the mills had large chimneys, and they were several stories high, so there were big buildings. The firm purchased a number of mules. These were spinning machines invented by Samuel Crompton. Approximately 200 people at different stages worked there, men, women and children. Now we know that in 1839 there were 7 children aged 11 to 12 actually working in the mill. They were the youngest. The men were paid 21 shillings a week, and this was the highest of all the workers. The first mills started about 1800, and then the new mill was opened about 1806. The mills continued to operate for approximately 50 years. And then in 1856, there were 2 serious fires at the new mill. Fires were quite common because of the nature of production. The local people, the workers, rushed to help. There were no casualties, but there was damage to both mills. It was soon after this, it is believed, the mills closed. There were those in the town who argued that the mills produced a rather smoky atmosphere, and with the disappearance of that, it helped Bangor to develop as a major seaside resort in the rest of the Victorian period.
Most people these days don't really know where their coal comes from. It could come from Russia, it could come from Colombia or South Africa, sometimes via Rotterdam into Belfast, but go back 30 years and more, all Irish towns that had a harbour would have imported their coal directly from Scotland or England, and in the town there would have been a coal merchant, and for Bangor the coal merchants were Charles Neal Limited and Robert Neal and Sons Limited. People might remember Charles Neal, the blue lorries, and Robert Neal, the red lorries, but both traced their beginnings back to the original Robert Neal, who started business in Bangor in the 1830s. And when he died, his 2 eldest sons, Charles and James, took over the business, and the James side later evolved into Robert Neal and Sons Limited. And they owned their own steamers until the 1950s, but before that they actually owned sailing ships in the days when the British Merchant Navy sailed all the oceans. Neal's ships, even one of them, the River Lagan, went around Cape Horn, and they visited the Baltic and Canada as well. Coal importing ended finally in Bangor in 1987.
I started off when I went in as telephonist and finished up as manageress. I started in 1978 and finished in 2000. We wore uniforms, started off with red uniforms and finished up with nice navy ones. We had a chair beside the fire, and people used to come in and sit to get heated up. One of the girls used to stand outside the door, and we used to take turns of collecting for children in need every year. Every week we changed whatever they were wearing to suit what was going on in the town or going on in the world even. We had one lady who knitted most of the uniforms, and my husband made sledges and beds and all kinds of things. We had them dressed one time as fire officers, and my husband was in the fire service and he made their helmets and cooked them in the oven. We had bomb, and poor Teddy suffered quite badly. He had to go into hospital to have his pads renewed and his eyes renewed. He came off the worst. The office closed in March 2000. They decided to move all the business up to Belfast.
intended to be a motor mechanic, but with gentle persuasion from my father and mother, well, they decided it was better for me to be working in the shop and perhaps take the shop over in due course when my father retired. We did orders on the push bicycles. Friday was a big day. We had orders at Ballyholme. When I got those done, I was told I had to go to Princetown Road. People would ring up the day before and just leave a standing order for every Friday. Some people got them on a Wednesday and a Friday in those days. We had the van then. We used to go to Grimsport to get fish, and then we went to Belfast, to the Belfast market, to get fish. So the van was very important, really. The supermarkets did make a very big difference to us, as it did, I would imagine, to most of the small traders in Bangor at the time. When they made High Street a one-way system, it certainly affected our trade very, very much. There was Scott's in Main Street, and there was Paddy Thompson in Market Street. John Hearn came into Abbey Street. We did have a few contracts with the Culloden and Crawfordsburn Inn and all at the time, but that didn't put the other people out of business. I think it was that there was no one to carry on from the elder people that was originally in the other shops. People's habits change from time to time. There's a lot of salmon bought now, more salmon bought now than there was years ago. It was a seasonal fish. June, July, August time was a time really for salmon, and most of our fish at this moment in time now comes from Peterhead in the east coast of Scotland or Aberdeen. We do get some like from Sri Lanka and Turkey, where we get our sea bass from. Sri Lanka comes with the tuna and swordfish. We get prawns now from Portavogie in our glass. We only want quality fish because that's what stood us in good stead for the many years that we've been in business.
The majority of Bangor Italian families came from the Italian region of Tuscany. They came from this little valley, which in those days would have been quite remote. It was a valley which, while it's in Italy, it had surprisingly weather similar to the British Isles in that in winter it can be very rainy and quite cold. And it appears that round about the late 1800s and the early 1900s, there was a system in place where certain Italians had created like a bridgehead and invited other Italians over to serve apprenticeships in shops, mostly ice cream shops and fish and chip shops. So a lot of the Italians who came over from the Circa region of Tuscany tended to end up in Scotland. They did their apprenticeship and most of them were quite successful. And then the first one was probably Enrico Caproni, who had gone through this rigmarole of getting an apprenticeship, setting up in business in Scotland. And then he came over for a holiday to Northern Ireland, and he came to Bangor and he liked what he saw. Bangor was just starting a transformation from being a small hamlet. Up until the mid 1800s, Bangor was basically two small hamlets. You had the area around the bay, and then you had another settlement up in Church Street opposite Bangor Abbey Church. Things were beginning to develop. They were beginning to get fun fairs along the seafront, and obviously had rowing boats and the like. So he set up an early business in Bangor. The Italians saw a gap in the market. They could start, creating a business based around fish and chips. But interestingly as well, they also thought that it would give them not only a good meal, but also a good dessert, because the Italians were famous in making ice cream. So here you had people who could give them this fancy dish of fish and chips, and then as a dessert they were able to get ice cream. So that was the basis of how the fish and chip business started in Bangor, with Enrico Caproni being the pioneer about 1900. Other members of his family followed, and then other Italians who were in this network, from Tuscany, who had served apprenticeships, also learnt of Bangor, and they followed.